Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 6th of May 2023. Let's get straight to it. Before we go to the front lines, we'll go to the ISW preamble, see if there's anything that's noteworthy. I think the Russian Ministry of Defense appears to have deprioritized, he says, skipping down the document, deprioritized the Bakhmut offensive in favor of preparing to defend against an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive, putting the Wagner Group and Wagner financier Yevgeny Prigozhin in a potentially difficult position. It goes on to say Wagner's continued persistence within Bakhmut is incongruent with the overall slowdown in the pace of Russian offensive operations elsewhere in Ukraine, as conventional Russian forces appear to be largely shifting focus to prepare to receive the much anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. This is super important. So Prigozhin shouting about Bakhmut and saying, "Oh, I'm going to pull out if you don't give us X, Y, and Z." And the Russian MOD appears to be kind of not really caring about Bakhmut, even though there's this idea that they need to have something by May the 9th. But I think they might just be realizing that if they don't put defensive things in place, they're going to get screwed over. I think it may be a point of realization that the Ukrainian counteroffensive might be pretty significant. There's an awful lot of, if I can find evidence of the counteroffensive being more significant than I previously thought in terms of the amount of equipment, the amount of trained troops, the amount of drones and drone operators, all this kind of stuff. If I'm starting to think, okay, this could be a pretty successful move if it all goes to plan and they got all their ducks in a row, then the Russians are going to be thinking that as well, and they are going to be thinking, well, we can pile a bunch of resources into Bakhmut continually, but at the expense of where else along the front line. And so there's that continued tension between Prigozhin and the Russian MOD within Bakhmut. Russian occupation authorities have announced a forced removal of 70,000 civilians in occupied Zaporizhia Oblast. I talked about this in the news piece. 18 different locations. A bit arbitrary. It's like, why would you tell people to get out of there and not everywhere? I don't get, like, your neighbours down the road, the next village or town down the road, and not being evacuated. So there must be reasons why particular places, 18 out of all the places in Zaporizhia, are being chosen. Those must be the places one assumes where the Russians are going to have most military activity. But then you're kind of signposting to the Ukrainians, hey, this is where we're going to have installations and this and that. So I don't know, but it's odd that they've chosen those 18 places. Anyway, 70,000 civilians in total in occupied Zaporizhia Oblast are going to be moved to areas deeper in Russian occupied rear under the guise of evacuations. So that I thought was worthy of note. Right, if we go to the northeast sector on the war mapper map, looks like this. In the top right of Ukraine, we've got Kupiansk-Kreminna, and really not a lot going on. This is on my map, Kupiansk here to Svatova, and then further down south to Kreminna. Just the usual activities of repelled offensive operations in Vuhledar, that's south of the forest, south of Kreminna. Spirina, so further south from there. Vuhledar again, Kreminna Forest, Makivka, Zarevka Gully, etc., etc. Just to let you know that Rebar has produced this pro-Russian source on Telegram has produced the update for what's been shelled, but no military activity. So that's interesting. So literally nothing to report. Syriac maps, no mapping updates. The only mapping changes on the pro-Ukrainian mapper, Deep State map, appear to be rejigging in Bakhmut rather than actual places that have been taken in Bakhmut, but I'll come to that in a second. So really not a lot happening. Those places, to let you know, are predominantly around here. So you've got the Zarevka Gully, which is in that area. You've got Makivka, you've got Vuhledar, and the Dobrova Forest. So that's where there's some activity potentially, but not a lot really. And Spirina down here in this area. There it is. But other than that, it's a case of moving on to Bakhmut. Really not a lot of information coming from Bakhmut, but stuff worthy of note still. If we go to the ISW, it says that geolocated footage published on May the 5th, so yesterday, shows that Russian forces have advanced in northwestern Bakhmut towards Kromova, directly west of Bakhmut. Okay, this is the geolocated area. So Ukrainian air mobile strikes Russian positions in this geolocated place. So the Russians are here. We're going to plug that in and see where it leaves us. and it takes us to there. Okay, so the Russians are there. That's actually what I have broadly in my mapping anyway. So I don't think that's a gain particularly. I am going to move my Ukrainian lines a little bit further back here to show that the blue lines are less important for me. It's all about where the pro-Russian mappers and where the pro-Ukrainian mappers say the lines are for the Russians, with the Ukrainians on the defensive around here. But yeah, that's a geolocation I don't think shows any gains as far as I'm concerned, at least not from my mapping from yesterday. But it might be for, as I said before, ISW operates in reporting the night before I do my mapping, and that relates to the whole day before that. So there is a kind of a time issue to consider there. And it goes on to say there is activity around Nova Makova, Klishchivka, Kupiansk-Kreminna. Those are both south of Bakhmut. Nova Markova is north, then Bodanivka, which is north, Markova north, Hurivka north, and Ivanivka south. So actually, that activity indicates, or those claims indicate, that the activity that's taking place in Bakhmut is more about activity around here, and even Kodimivka and Klishchivka, rather than in Bakhmut itself. So I don't know what that indicates. Well, I do. It seems to be that things have slowed down even inside Bakhmut as well. Geolocated imagery posted on May the 4th shows a destroyed Ukrainian bridge over the Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal west of Bakhmut near Chaziv Yar. Let's go and see where that is. So this is the canal, the bridge over the canal that's been blown up. And there are different claims as to who blew it up, as we've had previously with bridges in the Bakhmut area. Russians make claims, Ukrainians make claims that each of them have done it. Anyway, that is right far back in the Chaziv Yar area, so that has been hit all the way back there. I can't imagine that the Ukrainians would be blowing that up. But anyway, the Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces blew up the bridge, but the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that Russian forces struck an unspecified bridge near Chaziv Yar. ISW has not observed signs of a Ukrainian withdrawal from positions east of Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal, suggesting Ukrainian forces retain at least one critical ground line of communication into Bakhmut. I can't imagine that would be the Ukrainians. They would need that bridge. It won't also be too difficult to fix either. I would have thought with some bridging equipment. But anyway, to continue with the ISW, Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces conducted limited counterattacks near Bakhmut. The mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces conducted counterattacks, again, as I say, Bodanivka, Hirivka up to north, and Ivanivska and Klishchivka to the south. And that's pretty much that for Bakhmut as far as the ISW is concerned. I'm going to just go to some of the other sources. Bakhmut, as according to War Mapper, actually claims some increase in the Russians' territory gained in the north there. So have advanced further to the north of the city. It's interesting that War Mapper's saying this more than other sources recently, and they're usually behind the time on some of their mapping, but there you go. Poulet Volant shows pretty much what was shown yesterday. A little bit of Ukrainian territory regained in that central part, near the road coming up through. Well, I say central part. It's not the central part anymore. It's the central part of where the fighting is taking place. It is distinctly the western edge of Bakhmut. Suryat map says basically very little, just has a little bit of discussion. It's difficult to know whether there is absolute truth in Prigozhin's words that he's going to be pulling out by the May the 10th. What is certain is the existing corruption within the Russian armed forces cannot be ignored. The lack of preparation and equipment on the front line was the main cause of last year's Russian defeats at Kherson and Kharkiv. Needless to say, the war is demonstrating the indispensable role the private military companies are playing and will play in the future of warfare. The Wagner forces have made significant gains on such a fortified front as the Donbass. Not only have they achieved the practical capture of Bakhmut, but they have inflicted significant losses on the Ukrainian forces, which have worn down their capabilities for a full-scale counteroffensive. I don't think this is a future warfare. They've basically sacrificed a huge amount of what they see as dispensable human beings that I'm pretty sure most other nations aren't going to be doing. We aren't going to be turfing out thousands of convicts from our prisons to do that. I don't think, unless everyone goes, oh, that is a good use of prisoners or something like that. I'm not advocating that, by the way. This, however, has seriously damaged the image of the Russian armed forces. Yes, unable to achieve important advances in the last months on other fronts, although they have successfully managed to stabilize those fronts and consolidate their positions. So it's not surprising that the attempts of the Russian commanders to subdue the Wagner group by regulating the quantities of ammunition destined to the front. Nevertheless, Prigozhin's words seem to have had their effect, and the Russian artillery has resumed its activity at full capacity, attacking the last bastions of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. This seems to indicate that there is urgency to take the city as soon as possible and replace the Wagner group with other troops, and thus be assigned to other fronts where the Russian offensive will continue. However, it is quite possible that the Russian seizure of Bakhmut will mean the end of the Russian offensive actions in this half of the year, as the Ukrainian counteroffensive is getting closer and closer. And then post the incendiary strike on Bakhmut last night, which is not unusual; it has happened before, but that's a significant covering of the Ukrainian area there. I mean, that is pretty horrendous. And as I was talking about in the news piece, that will affect vehicles that have been left out, any kind of mechanized equipment that's not under some serious cover there might well be damaged and rendered inoperable. Um, that is pretty horrific covering of um, of Bakhmut with incendiary munitions there. Ukrainians are trying to hit back, taking out Russian positions here in Dubovo-Vadilivka. Looks like they've taken out an artillery depot or something cooking off there for sure. Mick Ryan has something to say about Bakhmut. So over the past week, there's been a lot of attention devoted to the attack on the Kremlin, as well as Ukrainian preparations for the offensive. Today, I will explore the legacy of Bakhmut. It's never too soon to learn from war, particularly for those who find themselves in the middle of it. And I think it's important. There's some important insights that might be gleaned from Bakhmut. There's been a debate as to whether Ukraine should have stayed or withdrawn. This is an important debate, but there are very few people who have the requisite information to have made this decision. I agree with this all the time. I was saying that Ukraine have done the calculation and they think it's worth staying. We don't have that information, so as far as they're concerned, it is worth it. It, it is worth staying in Bakhmut. We can go, oh, it's not worth it. They should have been out months ago, weeks ago, whatever. But actually, we don't. It's really difficult if we don't know what the information is and what the rationale truly is with those thinkers. What might have been some of the military considerations in this decision? Ukrainian senior commanders would have been thinking about the attrition of the Russians to distract Russia from offensive preparation by Ukraine and deceive them about Ukrainian priorities. They would have been thinking about the consequences for the Ukrainian defenders and casualties they might suffer. From a political perspective, and I've talked before about how political perspective is important. You can put things are larger than just this one small town in the Donbass. If they got a victory in Bakhmut, the Russians, then that might have given them a whole load of PR that they could have put in place internally in Russia, being able to recruit more people and even get, I don't know, weapons deliveries from China and stuff like this on the back of like shouting about this. So the political decision making can have very strong tactical and operational and strategic ramifications. So he said this isn't just a political imperative. The humanitarian urge to not subject any more Ukrainians to the awful predations of Russia is important. But from a political consideration, Zelensky would not want to give Putin a victory and would not want to have the strategic perception of Ukraine losing in Europe. And it is important to communicate to Russia that any chance of even minor victories is behind them. The decision to stay provides interesting insights into how the president of Ukraine thinks and how he works with his senior military advisors. The civil military interaction, Elliot Cohen calls this the unequal dialogue, is an important part of how Ukraine executes war strategy. Now, some people have said previously that Zelensky might be getting too involved in military decision making. I don't think that's the case. I think that arguably is the case more with Russia, where apparently Putin has been involved in military decisions and far too much. He's not a military strategist. I think Zelensky knows that, but he also knows the lay of the land in terms of political capital, in terms of PR and communication to the outside world, to his own domestic audience, and to Russia. And so Bakhmut is an important component in all of those aspects. And so there will be military decisions that have been involved, obviously, with regard to what's happened in Bakhmut. But Zelensky will also be able to bring other components that need to be plugged into the function machine that gives you some conclusion as to whether to stay or whether to go, whether to leave Bakhmut. And the decision was to stay, and it was seen as the right decision to make because, as I've explained before, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm going to make the wrong decision today. I'm going to make the wrong decision on purpose." And it's going to cost loads of lives, and I know it's the wrong decision. No one does that. So every time they've decided to stay in Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have been saying, right, this is the right decision, and this is the right decision because of this, but we know it's going to cost this, but on balance, it's still the right decision. And I think that has been vindicated, and that there will be a mix of, as I say, military, political, humanitarian, all sorts of different things, because there will be different metrics to success here in Bakhmut. Anyway, yeah, as I say, I think those decisions have been vindicated. Whether Russia would still continue to push in the next few days before the 9th, whether they see them as being able to take the last remnants of the town, or whether indeed uh, the Ukrainians are going to have some surprise up their sleeve that they've been rumored to have. Whether that is indeed happening as we speak, there could be some things going on that we don't know, because it's been relatively quiet in the information space concerning Bakhmut over the last few days. I don't know. So that's pretty much the situation in Bakhmut. It is unchanged, although there could be some movement in the north. Not 100% sure. But it is certainly the case. It appears to me that there is a culmination of the Russian forces, and we might be seeing a transition in Bakhmut, as well as that kind of transition that we've seen elsewhere, or we are seeing elsewhere on Frontline. As we come out of Bakhmut, come down further down south, and remember there is activity around Klishchivka, Kupiansk-Kreminna, and perhaps around New York. Indeed, I think New York is mentioned. I've seen, yeah, there is New York there. So New York, there is activity there still, but we don't have too much detail on that. And then we come down to Avdiivka, where things seem to be relatively quiet there still. The ISW states that there were unsuccessful offensive operations near Avdiivka and Marinka, and that's about it. And it goes on to Novomykhailivka and then Vuhledar. So really, very calm along the front lines in general, including in Bakhmut. Is that a quiet before the storm? One might ask. Novomykhailivka is here. Vuhledar just further to the south, which sits on high ground, just north of Pavlivka and Mikilska. The ISW says ardent nationalist and former Russian officer Igor Girkin claimed that Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces from positions west of Mikilska. That would be Pavlivka. That could be here, but we know that the Russians have been pushed back in this area southwest of Pavlivka. So whether that's referring to the same thing, I don't know. But to the outskirts of the settlement during limited counterattacks. That would indicate more that perhaps the Russians have been pushed back out of these dachas. I moved my map in line with Syriac maps, not in line with Deep State map that doesn't have the Russians here, because we had some geolocated footage the other day from the Russians in this dacha area, but they might not be there now. They could have been pushed back, as Igor Girkin claims, to the western outskirts of Mikilska. So that's what's going on there. And then when it comes to Zaporizhia and Kherson, no news again from the ISW. I do wonder whether there is, it says routine artillery there, whether there's operational security. There could be activity there, but it's just not being reported on. I imagine there would be reconnaissance and force activities taking place around Hyliopole and Orikhiv, south of those, as we have seen over the last couple of weeks anyway. But that's just me just saying that. No evidence of that as it stands. And really, that's the end of the Frontline reports. Not a lot to mention, but again, is that because things are being kept quiet? We know that Kenneth Gregg has he's claimed that there's a 2 to 3 day delay on what he can report. So there is definitely operational security going on in the information space for the Ukrainians. But you would expect that the Russians might get some things out. So I don't know. It just looks very quiet. Anyway, thank you for watching the Frontline update. I will try and get an extra this afternoon. I do have a live stream I'm doing for the release of my new book. So I'm not going to be able to do something for a good couple of hours, at least. But hopefully I'll get that out a little bit later. If not, it'll be tomorrow. I have recorded it. I just need to edit it. I recorded it yesterday because I knew today would be a busy day. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.